Welcome back. Recently, I had the opportunity to speak with best-selling author V.E. Schwab. She has written so many books. I'm sure you're familiar with them. Some are even getting adapted to the big screen coming up here this year. And she had an all-new book that came out yesterday for young adults called Gallant. Let's take a look.
Today, it's an absolute honor to be speaking with New York Times best-selling author V.E. Schwab about her latest book, Gallant. Very excited to learn more about this incredible, highly anticipated book. Victoria, thanks for being here today. How are you?
Doing well. Thanks so much for having me.
So tell me about this book. We're all so excited.
So I like to call Gallant The Secret Garden meets Crimson Peak. It's basically the story of a teenage girl named Olivia Pryor who has spent the vast majority of her life in an orphanage with nothing of her family's except for a journal, the entries of which seem to devolve into madness. But at the back of the journal is a letter from her mother. And the end of the letter tells Olivia that she will be safe as long as she stays away from Gallant. Now, for years, Olivia has no idea what this means until she receives a letter one day from an uncle she's never met, inviting her to come home to the family estate, which is called Gallant. But when Olivia gets there, she discovers no uncle, a house falling into disrepair, a garden being strangled by strange dead weeds, and a wall at the back of the property with a locked door that seems to lead nowhere.
Oh, very intriguing. So aside from your earlier description, this book seems to be not quite as maybe supernatural just on the surface, but I have a feeling that's not true, that there's some strange things going on here.
Yeah, I would say it's definitely a supernatural story in brief disguise, if you will.
And where did you get the inspiration for this new book?
It's really interesting. I think often we talk about ideas and inspiration as if they're single things, whereas really they're more like ingredients in a meal. Several years ago, I had this image in my head of this wall, and walls really only work if they go around something, if they keep something in or something out. But I just had this kind of image of a ruin of a wall, something you could walk all the way around, which sparked the question: if the wall doesn't contain anything, why does it have a locked door? And so I started wondering, of course, as you do, what would be on the other side of this door, and combine that with Gallant, the place, this lonely estate, and a girl who's just as lonely and just as angry and just as searching. And it kind of became a perfect recipe.
Oh, I love that. That's such a good point, that it's inspired by many different things, but what a great image. And I love how your mind works, which is why you're such a brilliant writer. You've always, it seems, been attracted to kind of this supernatural world. Is that true? What made you decide at the beginning to kind of write in this, it's a kind of fantasy, but kind of real life way?
Yeah, grounded fantasy, if you will. I always say that it's harder for me to get into books that feature fantasy worlds like Tolkien, for instance, where you'll only ever be able to access that world through the pages of the novel. I've always been much more drawn to stories that happen layering fantasy or layering magic or layering horror into our world, because it creates a proximity, right? It makes it feel close. It makes you look around at your reality and wonder if there's a door you haven't noticed, if there's a curtain you haven't drawn, if something is much closer than you thought it was. And so I've just always wanted to write stories that layer the magic onto the real in this way, that make you kind of doubt your reality.
And did you always want to be a writer?
I think I always wanted to be a storyteller. I never knew what shape it was going to take. In fact, I didn't try writing a novel until I was in college. And I realized I was terrified of failing to write one. And then I was like, oh, well, now I have to do it just to prove myself wrong. I still find novels to be such a daunting medium that I have to kind of trick my brain and break them down into smaller stories that link together into something big. But no, I knew I always wanted to make things up for a living.
You know, I feel like you have written along kind of the same themes as we mentioned, this, reality, also fantasy world, supernatural, but you're all over with genre as far as you've written for adults, you've written short stories. Is this your first young adult novel, and how is it similar to some of your other works?
No, actually, I started in young adult. So my first and my second and my third, and then my 13th and 14th, I think, were YA, but it's a standalone and it's actually really different. Gallant is special because it's my first all ages read. So to your point, I've written across these genre and age bracket spectrums. But what I've discovered over the years seeing my audience is that they don't coincide with the age posted on the book or the category. And if you think about it, books should really be more like jigsaw puzzles where they have a lower age threshold, but no upper age limit. We come back to stories at different times in our life and experience them differently. And so I wanted to write a novel that could sit on a middle grade shelf, a YA shelf, or an adult shelf comfortably or equally uncomfortably.
So is it correct to say that Gallant, while it's written for a young adult audience, it's really for anyone who's interested in kind of a supernatural world or for interested in things not being exactly as they seem?
Exactly. It's a fairy tale, and fairy tales appeal to all audiences and all ages. And so I think I just don't want you to be limited, I think, by what you assume a category should be. Like, I want you to be drawn to the story regardless of where it would sit on a shelf, especially because it's the kind of story that you could read with a friend or a child or a grandparent, and you would experience it differently, but be able to have a conversation.
And we're also excited to read Gallant, but I want to ask you as well, some of your works are currently being adapted to the big screen. So exciting.
Yeah, really exciting. A short story of mine, First Kill, is actually airing on Netflix as a series this summer. And that was just an incredible, I mean, to go from the loneliness of writing a novel, yes, you're a god of your world, you're in full control, but the collaboration is so exciting. And then The Invisible Life of Abbie LaRue, my most recent novel before Gallant, is currently in the works for film with Augustine Frizzell directing, and I couldn't be happier.
And this might be a hard question to answer in a short amount of time, but as a #1 New York Times bestselling author, do you have any advice, especially for young adults who are interested in becoming an author?
Absolutely. You know, the advice I would give is honestly find an ending that excites you. I think so often I talk to aspiring writers who abandon stories halfway through or they lose the momentum. But if you have an ending that you're super excited about, then on good days, you can't wait to get there. And on bad days, you won't quit because you know there's a measurable distance between you and the end. And once you have the end, once you have a draft, you can make it better.
Well, thank you so much, Victoria, for talking with us today. It's been such a joy speaking with you about your new book, Gallant, by V.E. Schwab, which is available today, March 1st, wherever books are sold. Thank you so much for your time with us today.
Thank you.